Welcome to Colonial Williamsburg. This was a great stop. Out of all these buildings in downtown, 88 buildings are still original. Most of those date from the 17 or 1800s. The Wren building, which is part of the William and Mary College, was made in the late 1600s. Most have extensive renovations, and some have actually been moved to their current site. But it's still really neat to see. And a lot of the buildings they have had rebuilt have a lot of neat history and a lot of historical evidence to help them build it more accurately to what it was back in the colonial period. We parked up at the visitor center and walked into town from there. From that location, the main building you come to first is the Governor's Palace. The palace was originally built around 1706 to 1710, and it was a royal governor's residence at that time. Interestingly, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson resided there for a time when they were in the Virginia Assembly. Williamsburg was the capital of Virginia until the capital was moved to Richmond in 1780. The original building actually burned down in 1781, though several of the brick outbuildings survived the original fire. During the Civil War, the remaining buildings that had survived were torn down so the materials could be used for other construction in the area. In the 1930s, with funding from John D. Rockefeller, a lot of reconstruction started happening. This building was one of those they did a lot of research on. They did archaeological studies in the area, and as you can see from that picture, they actually found the original foundations for the original building. They also had drawings from Thomas Jefferson, who, before they moved, he was the one that asked the capital to be moved to Richmond, Virginia. And they were talking about remodeling the building, so he actually did some detailed drawings of the building, and those drawings survived. They also found a copper engraved plate in England called the Bodleian plate, and it had really nice engraving of the outside of the building. They were able to use all of that evidence they had found to reconstruct the building as accurately as possible as to what it was back then. This is the main entrance of the building, and one of the things that was done back in that time was they did have weapons on display like this, kind of showing those that came to it the might of the British Empire and the strength of their military. And of course, a lot of these weapons you see, including the muskets, are replicas. There are some original muskets on display here at the house. And of course, it had immaculate gardens that stretched quite a while. And of course, your outbuildings. There were storerooms, smokehouses, and a kitchen outside, not part of the actual main building. It was interesting, back in those days, the kitchens were normally placed outside away from the main residence, because that's where all the cooking was done, and cooking back then was done by burning wood or coal, and of course that had a tendency to sometimes accidentally burn the building down. And if your kitchen wasn't part of the main residence, then all you'd have to do is rebuild a kitchen, not the whole residence. And of course your servants did most of your cooking in big palaces like this, so that was another reason to keep the kitchen outside. This is another place, kind of like Mackinac Island, where most of the downtown roads are closed off to vehicular traffic. So this is all pedestrian and horse-drawn carriage and the like, which is really neat. The courthouse here was built between 1770 and 1771. It's actually the location where Benjamin Waller read the Declaration of Independence on July 25th, 1776. It was also a hospital for a short time for the Confederacy during the Civil War. We really enjoyed being at the public armory. It had the blacksmith, tin shop, kitchen, shoemaker, and wheelwright. Of course, we were not there during the busy time of the year, so a lot of these places normally have reenactors like this at the shops, showing you and explaining to you how they did things. This is the shoemaker. And because we were there at kind of a lower tourist area time, there weren't as many actors. I love these living history museums, being able to watch them, how they did things. They still use all the old techniques in the blacksmith shop. This is just an example of some of the different things they make in the shop. And yes, they still make these things today. They were demonstrating how they were cutting the metal to specific sizes for whatever it was they were working on at that time. But it is an active blacksmith shop that really does make these items. This is one of Sonia's favorites, going to the printing office and the bindery. I have to say, the gentleman working the press here in the printing office was exceptional. He did a really good job of explaining the techniques. Those are leather pads that he has to ink the printing press between every single print. And then we went up to the bindery, and a little unfortunate, the gentleman there really did not do a lot of explaining to the complete process of binding a book. He did state it would take a long time to explain it all because it is a very involved process. But that was one of the things Sonia was very excited to see. Still a really neat shop, really neat to see the different equipment they used and the processes they had available to them back in the 1700s. The Capitol building has kind of an interesting history. The first one, built in 1705, burned down in 1747. The second one was built in 1753 and burned down in 1780. This current one was built and opened in 1934. The reconstruction is based on the first building because of its unique architecture. A lot of people felt that the second one was lacking a little bit in the details. And they found information on that Bodleian plate in England on the first Capitol building. And then we went to the gunsmith shop, which wasn't too far from the Capitol. It's very interesting to see the process they use. And yes, they use these processes still today to make working muskets or rifles here. And you'll see in a little bit an example of it, but they will take flat steel and they will shape it around various forge devices and hammer to make that flat iron into a tube to make the barrel. Then that machine you were looking at there actually reams out the hollow center of that forging to smooth out the actual barrel itself. But technology back in the day, they could not build a solid metal barrel and then ream out a flat, straight, clean hole from end to end. It was easier and better for them to take a flat piece of steel, pound it into a round tube, and then use that reamer to smooth the barrel surface out inside. And they had different reamers for different calibers. What I thought was fascinating here is they make everything in-house. They cast the brass buttstocks and the brass trigger guards, and they do all of it. That machine the gentleman has his hand on is actually the rifling machine, and by pushing and pulling that wooden cylinder that's got those grooves in it, it has a small cutter that goes up and down the barrel, and that cutter, as that item is moving in and out, actually cuts the rifling in the barrel. You gotta remember, this is the 1700s. They didn't have all the fancy machines that we have today. And it was just amazing. You can see on the table there where that flat piece of metal is being forged into a circle. Just fascinating. Williamsburg was a real fun place to visit. And of course, for those that don't mind the crowds, it's probably better to go in the summertime when most of the shops are open, so that you have those living history reenactors present that can explain what's going on and tell you how life was back then. Even on the off time that we were there, there was still enough going on and enough reenactors you could ask questions to that it made it a real neat experience. Williamsburg became the capital of Virginia in 1699 when it moved from Jamestown. One of the original buildings that's still present is the Wren Building, which was built in 1693 and is part of the College of William and Mary. Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, and John Tyler are just some of the folks that actually attended the College of William and Mary. Williamsburg remained the capital of Virginia until 1780 when it moved to Richmond, Virginia. Thomas Jefferson felt that was a much safer place during the Revolutionary War for the capital of Virginia than Williamsburg was. Just some real neat history. I really like the living history museums like this. Just a real fascinating place to go. There's so much to see in Virginia. We loved our visit.